Hello and welcome to Global Payfest 25. We are officially halfway there, and I'm here in my home country, the United Kingdom. I'm Alexandra Walker, manager at JGA Recruitment, and your host for the UK segment of our 24-hour global journey through the ever-evolving world of payroll. So far, we've travelled through Australia, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, and we're about a third of the way into our travels through Europe. It's 11 a.m. here in the UK, so the perfect time for a tea break while we unwrap the complexities and opportunities of payroll here in the United Kingdom. The UK has a combination of legacy systems, modern reforms, and post-Brexit regulatory shifts, which presents distinct challenges for global businesses. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by the legendary UK payroll expert, Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance Strategies at SD Worx. Simon is a well-respected expert in UK payroll with a wealth of experience advising both public and private sector organisations on everything from tax legislation to digital transformation in payroll. He's a regular on SD Worx monthly webinar, Payroll Question Time, which JGA host. So if 1 hour today isn't enough, you can check out April's PQT on the SD Worx website, which was just released last week. Simon, thank you so much for being here today. And for those, I guess, that don't know you, please, if you could start by telling us a little bit about your background and your journey into the UK payroll world.
Yeah, good to be with you, Alexandra, and part of the event. What a great week I think this global type of event is having, and a great time. So I joined Centerfile, which was part of NatWest Bank Group back in 1984, so just a couple of years ago. At the time, it was one of the largest payroll organisations in the United Kingdom, and I came in their technology department. So my experience background is a programmer, a developer, and I started by getting involved in the writing of a new payroll software solution. I've now been involved in the writing of about 4 payroll solutions. Of course, Centerfile was taken over by Ceridian. Ceridian was taken over by SD Worx, so we're now in the part of the SD Worx family, been going over 75 years in payroll organisations, payroll services in the European Union. My background in payroll, you could say, is I tend to say my parents both worked for the Army Pay Corps during World War II.
Ah.
So I'm a genetic payroll person.
It's in your blood.
It is, yes. They're both accountants, and they were there, and yeah, and fell into payroll software development. So I'm a member of the British Computer Society Payroll Specialist Group, which I chair, and Irene, and I sit on a number of HMRC panels. For some reason, I have this ability to read taxation, national insurance law, and understand it and be able to turn it into code. And we've got some challenges going ahead into the future. So as part of the committee for the Office of Tax Simplification when it existed, that proposed voluntary payrolling of benefits in kind. And I guess we'll cover a little bit about that later, because we're going from voluntary to mandatory in the future.
Well, thank you, Simon, and it's great to have you here. So today we'll be exploring some of the biggest challenges in the UK payroll, recent legislative updates, and practical advice for multinational organisations operating here. As we have done around the world so far, we'll walk through a case study and we'll finish off with a Q&A to tackle common payroll questions from our global audience. So let's get started with some of the expertise on the UK payroll landscape, and I will hand over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Alexandra. I'm going to cover through a number of slides that are prepared for us today, which cover how the UK operates. Just bear with me whilst I get it all working. Is that visible, Alexandra?
Not at the moment.
Okay, let me go back.
coming up. Yeah,
How's that?
yeah, we're there.
Yeah, sure. So we're going to go straight into um, the legislative framework of the UK. I'm not going to talk through these, it's just to illustrate that you're dealing with lots and lots of different agencies of the government that deal with taxation, student loans, pensions, equality, etc. Quite often you think all this legislation, all the requirements that apply to payroll would all align. And invariably some bits do, but many bits don't. So we're going to go through the various areas in relation to what's happening in 2025. So income tax for the United Kingdom has not really changed. So the free pay has remained the same, with one exception. And in England and Northern Ireland, known sometimes as the rest of the United Kingdom, there is no change to taxation. It's still there. So people can earn £12,570 free of tax, spread throughout the year, and then there's 20, 40, 40%, 45% tax bands. Quite often what we see with error and challenge, and HMRC report this often, is that lots of employers fail to collect correct data, and this is some part of your case study, I believe, Alexandra, and other aspects of where errors occur, that they see far too many people on Declaration C, which indicates they haven't actually completed the starter information that's required. And so it's essential to remind us that those things are required. Now, we have devolved governments, and I'm rushing through this because of the shortness of time, but we have devolved governments in the United Kingdom. So the government of Scotland can set their own tax bands and rates, and have done so. So we're highlighting on this slide what they have done to taxation for Scotland for 25-26. And Wales are the ability to set their own tax rates. They don't have the ability to set their own tax bands, have equally just mirrored the rest of the United Kingdom. So Wales taxation is the same as England and Northern Ireland. Now, the other area of complexity that comes into play for payroll is the operation of national insurance. Announced as part of the spring budget 2024 was a significant increase to employers' national insurance. So employers' national insurance has gone up from 13.8% to 15%. And also they announced the secondary threshold. That's the threshold at which employers start to pay national insurance, dropping to £5,000. However, to offset the significant cost for small employers, they've increased the employment allowance to £10,500 and remove the conditions that used to stop a lot of employers from being able to claim it. So various changes that are significantly impacting. Many will say that's actually causing a slowdown in the economy, a slowdown in recruitment practice in the UK, and we'll have to see how that pans out over the next little while. So what does that mean? I'm not going to talk through these, they're just there as information and resource. We now have lower earnings limit of 125, secondary threshold is identified there, and all the other bans that now apply for the 25-26 tax year, which means that we have changes to rates and the point at which national insurance contributions start. So earnings below the secondary threshold 0%, earnings above the secondary threshold 15%, with some exceptions for some special cases like free ports, investment zones, etc. Now, the employment allowance I also mentioned was rising to £10,500. That was previously 5,000 for employers, and is available to much more wider group of employers than it previously was. The other obligations that payroll in the UK has to apply is, of course, the collection of student and postgraduate loan repayments. There are various different types. Plan 1 and Plan 2 relate to England and Wales. Plan 4 relates to Scotland, and postgraduate loans are there as well. So there are various thresholds and starting points that are indicated on the bottom line of when they now commence, and the rates applicable. So where people are earning at a rate annually that exceeds that, they'll pay an extra amount back to the government. It's a bit like an extra taxation really, but it's offset against monies that were loaned to them when they went to university. Sickness is an area of change that's coming up in the Employment Rights Bill. So there's proposals for future years. This year, there's still the same basis that you have to be sick for 4 days, 3 waiting days, and then there's a weekly statutory sick pay entitlement of 118.75. That's all changing in the future. So in the future, as part of the Employment Rights Bill, the threshold it reduces to 0. Waiting days is abolished, so statutory sick pay will be due from day 1 of full sickness, and instead of having a £125 test that you have to have average earnings of £125 or not, that is removed, and the statutory sick payment will be capped at 80% of their average earnings or the statutory rate. So interesting times ahead. When is that coming into play? Not yet confirmed, but it's a possible for April 26, and all part of the Employment Rights Act changes. And then we have, of course, in the United Kingdom, statutory parental leave rights for those on maternity, adoption, paternity. You can share maternity rights with the partner by giving up some, so the mother can give up some time and pass it over to the father or the partner. Then we have also payments for bereavement, and new payments have come into play for neonatal care for babies born from 6th of April 2025. The weekly rate of payment, if they're entitled to that, is £187.18, or 90% of their average weekly earnings if their average weekly earnings was less. So this obligation applies to your UK employees. Also, as part of the employment rights, they have protections whilst on maternity. So you have to really consider carefully whether you're downsizing a business and who you choose, because the maternity discrimination rights are fairly tight. The other aspect, just going back, is that the small employers recovery amount, so those that have NIC bill of under £45,000, rose significantly. So it's gone from a prior 3% compensation rate to 8.5%. So all employers can get back 92% of these statutory payment amounts, but small employers whose secondary contributions are under £45,000 in the prior tax year can get an 8.5% compensation. So for every £100 paid, you get £108.50 back. And then, of course, there's obligations for pensions in the United Kingdom. It's called pensions auto-enrolment. The thresholds have been frozen for some time. There is actually law which permits the government to set these down to 0 so that everybody is triggered. But currently, the automatic enrolment trigger is earnings at a rate of £10,000 or more, and it's been that way for a number of years now. So everyone has to be auto-enrolled. You can apply a 3-month postponement, and there are minimum contribution values, 8% overall, of which 3% must be paid by the employer. So any UK worker potentially has to be placed into a workplace pension. There are a number of workplace pensions you can use, and a different number of types of tax relief available for different types of pension. Now, the major concern area that will be affecting UK employers, those internationally employing in the UK, is the national minimum wage rises. So the rise to 12.21 for those aged 21 and above was 6.7%. And you'll see for the younger ages, they were even higher. So the intention is to move towards a living wage that reflects for every adult in the UK the same, and that's where these are marching. That brings into some difficulty for employers who are operating flexible benefit schemes or salary sacrifice, as there are risks of breach of national minimum wage. So as those rates go up, those are offering fairly common benefit types such as bikes, childcare, pensions, or even others, will find that salary sacrifice arrangements are getting considerably difficult to administer in the United Kingdom. And of course, there's a living wage. The real living wage is a voluntary rate that's quite often used by over 12,000 employers now in the United Kingdom. So the living wage has risen to £12.60, and if in the London area, 13.85. Now, those employers who signed up to that have 6 months to implement that rate from its announcement point, 22nd of October. So that makes it actually April just now. So those make rates, and they're higher than the statutory minimums. Now, I hinted at it earlier, but from April 2026, the government have proposed, there's still further information to be revealed, that they would want formal payrolling to be operated as a compulsory element from April 2026. That affects the reporting of benefits. So quite often benefits are treated differently between countries. So if you have international employments, some things that might be taxable, for example, in Belgium, are not taxable in the United Kingdom, and vice versa. And instead of a once a year reporting on forms P11D, now there's this obligation to payroll. So you actually have to put the benefit through the payroll and report it there, and calculate the employer's liabilities as well, because there's usually a 15% Class 1A liability. All these things are moving ahead rapidly, changing the payroll world. So will it be the same as payrolling that some have done for the prior year since it was introduced in 2016? It'll be different. And there are some benefits that can't be payrolled, for example, beneficial loans, but they will be from April 26 on a predictive and corrective basis, assuming those confirmations go ahead. Accommodation is also very difficult to payroll because it's a retrospective view, but they're allowing that to be done voluntarily on a predictive and corrective basis from April 26. And there may be more detail that's required. Currently, when you payroll benefits, you report very little apart from company cars, which require a lot of detail. But for other benefit types, there's very little actually reported with it, and that may change. And there's also the proposal to collect Class 1A, that's a 15% liability on most benefits from the employer as well in real time. So it's going to be slightly different, but the world is changing as we
There's a
move
lot to
forward.
come.
Yeah, a lot to go. I was going to go through some of the aspects of holiday pay, and I think that's part of your case study as well. So with holiday pay, it's a major area of confusion in the United Kingdom. There's considered to be 1.7 million in employees that are not receiving their holiday entitlements that they're allowed as a statutory minimum. And for others, there'll be calculation issues and types. So there are 3 legitimate holiday pay calculation types that now operate in the United Kingdom. Classic 52 weeks earnings average. There's a new hours accrual and a new rolled up holiday, but they don't apply to everyone. So the classic pre was everyone's entitled to a minimum of 5.6 weeks. 4 weeks of that was under EU legislation, and extra 1.6 weeks was under United Kingdom legislation, and that applied to casual workers, 0 hours workers. It applied to everyone, term time workers, the lot. But there have been challenges with that, lots of non-compliance and changes. So, and the payment of that holiday pay changed in April 2020 to 52 paid weeks earnings average. So instead of the former 12 weeks earnings average, you have to now take in 52 paid weeks earnings average, don't include 0 weeks, and you can look back for those 52 weeks up to 104 weeks, in other words, 2 years. New starters you would average, so those people who don't have 52 weeks, you just average over the weeks you do have. And what does that include? That includes things like overtime, commission, and various other payments. So the worker types and holiday pay methods are: you've got regular workers, they have contract hours, they work every week of the year, and you have irregular and part year workers. And there's concession now that for irregular and part year workers from April 2024, you could operate two new methods. One is hours accrual, and the other is rolled up holiday. So sometimes we hear of this comment of 1207%. So does it have to be 1207%? 1207% represents 5.6 weeks over 52 weeks. Even though there's more than 52 weeks, that's the calculation required on that basis. However, some people give higher entitlements. So what should it be? Because part-time and agency workers come into falling, especially if they've been there over 12 weeks, into being treated the same as full-time staff. So if the weeks entitlements for full-time staff are higher, then potentially for this group of people, the percentage to be used should be higher as well. This table kind of illustrates it. So under new Reg 15B entitlements of holiday accrual hours, it's you have this 1207% or whatever percentages that needs to, with half-hour rounding up and down, which is unusual because before everything was always rounded up. Now it can be rounded down. So 10.5 hours minus a minute rounds to 10 as being the accrual basis of 1207%. 10.5 rounds up to 11, making a 1207% on the 11 hours instead. And there's special rules for sickness as well. And the other aspect, and I think comes into the case study maybe or other, is rolled up holiday pay, or one of the questions. So there's a new 1207% uplift, or the percentage that the employer wishes to apply if you're looking at equality between part-time and full-time, that has to be paid when pay is paid. And that is a new option from April, and it's different to the prior illegal methods that were applied by many. So the combined pay would make up as the normal pay plus a 1207% of all payments in that period. And there's special rules for when people are on statutory leave or sick, to the extent that if they're on sick leave, an accrual or a payment still needs to happen. So you'll still accrue holiday hours during periods of sickness and statutory maternity pay, for example. And equally, during rolled up holiday, if you're applying that, there is a requirement to still pay each period the 52-week average of the prior rolled up holiday pay. So I think that probably leaves us at a point, Alexandra, where we can talk about UK top challenges, I think.
Brilliant.
And yeah, and I'll just put in there, I'll just put it as a slide, we can come back to it if we need to. The government are launching a Fair Work agency sometime, probably in 2026, that will come in and police national minimum wage, holiday entitlement pay, and sick pay to ensure people are receiving it. Okay. There, back with you.
Wonderful, well, thank you. And we're about halfway through the session now. So thank you for all of that information. I'm sure the audience will find that super, super valuable as they watch and perhaps go over again. So now we will look at our fictional company, Nova Edge AI. This is a fast-growing tech company that set up a shop in Manchester with 30 employees. So Simon, if you could guide us through the key payroll issues they have faced around holiday pay compliance, benefit reporting, and HMRC submissions. I'm just going to share my screen now so that you can see that on there. And yeah, if we could kind of talk through the challenges that they are going to face, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of challenges they're facing, and it's quite a landscape to get through for a new employer in the UK, especially if they come from overseas as well, because practices in the UK will be different to other nations around the world. The challenges, well, there are a number of them. We were saying they've got incorrect holiday pay for variable hours. That won't be unusual. It's quite common, but it's something that employers need to start to tackle and get right, especially with the first Fair Work Agency that I've mentioned coming into play, because law in a lot of these employment cases is changing. Before, these were civil matters, and they've actually been changed under the Employment Rights Bill to now be criminal matters. So it isn't the fact that an employee can take you to court as a civil matter and you're awarded a bit of cash or some other ruling. The people running the company can face criminal charges, potentially even imprisonment. Not that imprisonment has been used so far for minimum wage, but that is an option available. So there is an element of increasingly needing to get these things right. So the incorrect holiday pay for variable hours is one of the areas that has been identified, and it needs to carry on as it violates the averaging rules required, or the correct accrual or or rolled up holiday pay if that applies, but they only apply if they're truly irregular and part year workers. If it's just they have 15 hours in the shop and then do overtime, then they're a regular worker. They're meant to be paid under that top up of every additional overtime payment, standby, all those sorts of payments included as part of their holiday pay entitlements, commission, I should have mentioned, rather than standby. So it's more common than we think. It's very little understood on holiday. The legislation is poorly designed. It is designed for weekly pay frequencies, not non-weekly. However, pay does need to reflect the additional. And we have had this 1207% rolled up holiday pay for those that are truly irregular and part year. Um, Equally, I think we're saying the sales staff are on variable hours, will pay flat rate holiday, which violates the statutory average pay rules as well, as you're pointing out there. Again, commission forms part of the holiday pay requirements. So you can't just pay a flat rate, you have to include elements of commission, at least for 4 weeks, because that's part of European Union court rulings. And we could say, well, Great Britain is no longer, or United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union because of Brexit, but as part of that, all of the European law that related to employment was brought into United Kingdom legislation. So it is UK rulings too. Um, the other area that we looked at in this case study is that the benefits hadn't been reported, and so there are risks to their compliance. Of course, benefits can be payrolled, so they don't necessarily have to be on P11Ds, but you had to register before, and we've got this concept of mandation coming into the future. So in the future, there may be an element of looking at mandation. P11D errors can be expensive. There are penalties potentially imposed by HMRC if forms are not submitted and if they're late. So it's just an area of care to make sure that appropriate benefits are identified and reported to HMRC. So there's an indication that car allowances and private health were not properly reported. So same sort of thing, is there a risk area for the employer of penalties. Plus there is a class 1A liability on these benefits to be paid. So you just need to make sure that that's all cleared up. Sometimes there's an element of hold your hand up, get it resolved, rather than wait for inspectors to call, because the inspectors can be a little bit unkind if they want to be. Another area I think we found here is that they were late in their reporting of their RTI submissions. Now, RTI, that's real-time information. For some years now, since 2013, it's been compulsory for employers to report their payroll data to the government in real time. It's not really real time. Technology-wise, you call it right time, because it's not interactive. But that reporting is on or before the payday. So where it's late, there is a little bit of a grace period still operated by HMRC, but if you're late, a penalty will be levied, and there could be interest charges associated with any underpayments. And if you forget to report anything, then what comes into play is something called a specified charge. So they make an assumption of you've forgotten something. We'll assume on your historic reporting that this amount is due, and then they'll chase it as being factually accurate until they're told otherwise. So some risks with late RTI submissions and late payments. People get caught by the fact that payment has to be with HMRC on the 22nd of the month, where that falls on a bank holiday or a weekend, for example. Almost closely this week with Easter break, it can fall that way. If you're late, the payment has to be on the prior banking day to that payment deadline. Otherwise, you'll find there's interest charges applied to the late payment. So don't delay submissions. There are late reporting reasons you can apply to real-time informations that are reported late for a reason. And sometimes we see that share equity, vesting, bonuses that were paid overseas that the UK have only just found out about. There are reasons you can give for a late reporting on the FPS, which will stop the penalties and the interest. Well, it won't stop the interest charge, the fines, but it will stop the fines. But there's a basis of apply the late reporting reason, it'll stop the fine, but they will potentially look at it to see if that was genuine or not. Another aspect I think about this case was that the redundancy payments had been misclassified. Redundancy and termination payments in the UK can fall into three sorts of categories. There's pay in lieu of notice or notice pay, and there's a special calculation called a PEMP, a PENP, post-employment pay calculation. I forgot what the rest of the N and P stand for. Doesn't matter. There's a PEMP calculation, which determines what is taxable and what is non-taxable, because potentially true redundancy payment is not subject to tax for the first £30,000, is subject to tax 30,000 and above, but that can't include notice pay. Anything that was due for payment as notice is taxable as earnings. So if this amount was truly redundancy and was put through as bonus, it would have had tax and national insurance deducted. Where if it was redundancy, it would have been non-taxable and there'd be no national insurance liability on the employee. So they've overpaid, and equally the employer may have paid as well. So there is an element of making sure that termination payments are taxed correctly and processed. Quite often we find it, and we find it as people come to us and say, well, this is redundancy, pay this amount. There are three classifications. There's a redundancy amount which might just be notice pay. There's a redundancy amount which may generally be redundancy, but redundancy is sometimes labeled on lots of things. And then there's the amounts over the 30,000 limit where it's tax-free generally. All right, so there's three classifications, and employers need to state what it is that's being applied. Don't always assume that the payroll will know, because it doesn't know the circumstance. All right, and I think there's an element of what can they do about this? Is that where we go on that, Alexandra? And
Yeah,
there's
so
an element of,
yeah,
yeah,
most certainly.
yeah. So they need to explore with the payroll supplier or the payroll software what capabilities it has for dealing with holiday pay, would be a good point. So some solution that will store the 52 weeks of the variable pay to calculate the relevant averaging would be great. P11D is on its way out, but there is good P11D software out there or suppliers who will file those. So it's engaged with those experts on the taxation side. Real-time information for many solutions can be automated in its submission in our SD Worx world. The collection of tax codes is automatic. It just applies overnight HMRC issue tax codes to approved agents or employers, which can be collected electronically. For some pay solutions, you may have to go and collect that and apply it. So if you forget, you've missed it. In relation to our own, and I'm sure some other services, it just does it because it polls for it and just does it. So there isn't even a pressing of a button. And equally, there's common mistake in RTI filing with HMRC. It causes a misbalance on accounts. It's not unusual. HMRC would say it's rare. It's about 1 or 2% of cases, but 1 or 2% of cases of 1.6 million employers is quite a high number.
Mhm.
So, and the larger the employer, the more likely it is you may have a misbalance at some point or other. So they can cause a headache. Nothing really to majorly worry about, but they can appear rather scary. So there's other elements of making sure the pay elements are set up right for redundancy and bonus, so that they're automatic. So it's good to engage with an in-country expert who knows what the correct classification is and make sure they go. Another common practice for payroll practitioners in the UK is to have a calendar of events, so they have prompts to remind them of timescales, because sometimes government timescales are different to the business operation. For example, payments are due 22nd of the month or the 19th. Potentially, if not electronic, and equally with pension payments and other duties. And pensions auto enrollment duties are quite complex, so there's an element of make sure your software is there, can deal and help you with assessment, enrollment and contributions. Yeah, so I think that's probably it
Covered.
on the,
Thank you. I'm going to
yeah.
bring us back to normality. Wonderful. Well, thank
Okay.
you. So now that we've kind of gone through that, we are going to take some time and deep dive into some frequently asked questions
Okay.
from payroll professionals that are managing UK operations. So I'm going to get started with how should global employers handle benefits in kind reporting?
Yeah, sure. And this is one of the major changes that's coming in April 2026 potentially, and
Hmm.
is that benefits have to be handled through the payroll. So we need to consider the global rewards packages being operated, because quite often we want a common operation of benefits for everyone throughout our workforce, no matter which nation, but they don't always work in the same way as the home nation. Invariably have tended to find we think the global operation is the home nation's operation, and it isn't. So there are local laws which will make things different. So I think if I give an example, mobile phones, as far as I'm aware, is a taxable benefit in Belgium.
Hmm.
It's not taxable for your UK workforce, so you don't have to report it as taxable here. It's not even considered a benefit, whereas other things may reverse the opposite way. And so it's just important to think there are in-country differences. So when I did my master's, we talked of global solutions, and then they talk of glocalization. So although you may be applying a global solution, there are local differences that have to be considered, etc. But when payrolling, well, at the moment there's a P11D reporting regime. To do otherwise, you have to register with HMRC. That potentially changes in April 26. You've then got to consider how you put these notional excuse me, benefit amounts through payroll for the assessment of the appropriate tax.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of managing, I guess, well, mismanaging holiday pay. So what are the risks of mismanaging holiday pay for part-time or seasonal workers?
Yeah, so new law came in which permits two different methods of application for holiday for irregular hours workers and part year workers. So these sort of now seasonal workers is different. I think we've got to consider what part year worker is. And a part year worker is someone that's under contract but had periods of times where they receive no pay,
Hmm.
whereas a seasonal worker might not fall into that category because their employment starts and ends and there is no period of zero pay in there. So it's ensured that the classification is right. But currently we know that 1.7 million employees estimated by the government are not receiving their holiday pay rights.
Wow.
And hence one of the reasons the Fair Work Agency is being created. It's been announced, it's being formed, comes into play probably sometime in 2026. Because at the moment, if your holiday pay is wrong, what can you do about it? Can you go and tell a policeman? There is no policeman to tell. Um, you can take up a grievance, you can go to ACAS, one of the employment rights type agencies set up by the government. They can tell you what to do, but to a certain extent, the employer could just blow a raspberry at you and tell you to get lost.
So that
Um,
agency will be somewhere that employers can report to if
yes,
they know that there's something going on that's not correct.
correct, and they'll investigate. So they
And
will.
will they only investigate once they, let's say, receive some kind of accusation? There won't be anything like mystery shopping or anything like that, let's say.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, we've only got the national minimum wage to look as an example. So national minimum wage falls into that regime of being criminal activity potentially. But if someone makes a complaint about national minimum wage, the HMRC NMW audit team come
Hmm.
in, investigate all cases. It may take them some kind time, but the difference is that they don't look at the case that complained, they look at everyone. Whereas in holiday pay, currently, you could take your employer to an in tribunal and force your case through and win, but that affects you. They won't look at anybody else because
Hmm.
there's nothing to do with it. Whereas the Fair Work Agency potentially would have the powers to look at everybody and see what's
Mm.
going on.
Almost kind of
And so
opening up a can of worms.
well, it is because the person that complained might just do it because they're a bit, I don't know, belligerent and want to make a nuisance. When it comes to it, you look at their case, you actually find that they have been paid above national minimum wage or they have been paid their holiday pay correctly.
Hmm.
But when they've got investigation, they may find 20 other people that haven't, and
Yeah.
they'll make you pay them. So quite often with national minimum wage audit, it isn't the person that complains that the employer's caught, it's everybody
Yeah.
else.
Everyone's going to be much more wary.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. So next question. So how can employers stay compliant with changing tax codes?
Okay. Well, these days, many solutions allow automated collection of tax
Hmm.
codes through what HMRC in the past has referred to as electronic exchange or LX. For example, in the SD Worx Pay solution, it's all automatic. So if you register for online codes, tax codes themselves come into play. But there is an important with tax in general that you keep your software updated and regular. Plus, the other aspect, which is a reminder I think I put in one of the slides I showed, is get correct information from your employees. You'll be happier, your employee will be happier as well. So we're seeing lots of employers don't collect starter checklist information of their employee, so their taxation is wrong. and can be for a number of years. Now, everybody that employs has to do what they call right to work checks. You have to make sure you're allowed to work in the UK, or you could face significant penalties, £20,000 for a legal worker. So you have to do right to work checks. They have to provide identification, passports, birth certificates,
You
whatever.
do that check as well from being as an agency, I guess,
Sure.
supplying a candidate to an employer, although they're going to be working for the employer who will do their own right to work checks. We will also do our own right to work checks as well, because I guess we're just as liable.
Well, that's right. And these days, especially with another factor which I throw in is the change to the tax advice market that comes into play in April 26. There's a requirement to do what they call AML, or anti-money laundering due diligence. I can't say that's exactly the same as right to work checks, but there's an element of we
Mhm.
actually have to verify that people are real, because I'm sure there's still cases of ghost employees, ghost employments that occur. It's an element of stop the criminals,
Yeah.
verify as much as possible.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so
Yeah.
last couple of questions. So I think we briefly covered this earlier, but in terms of late RTI submissions, what happens if they are?
If they're submitted late,
Yes.
generally, yeah, there's an element of fix it as soon as you can, and
Mhm.
if you need to speak with a specialist about that, do it. But if they're late, you'll find that your accounts start to become misbalanced, and and your employees probably won't be too happy, because some of them may be claiming universal credit. So it's important to make sure your solutions are built to deal with it. Plus, you could be facing some penalties that are automated in some instances. Um, so there are reasons you can give for late submission, and there are areas. So it's quite common. Overseas income is sometimes late. There are special arrangements where people have multinational employments but are UK tax residents. So there are reasons that can be given on the RTI FPS submission for that in your payroll software. You can give reasons for lateness, which prevents the penalties. However, it can lead to great angst, and many will experience duplicate records, misbalances on their HMRC account, which are difficult to resolve, predominantly because the HMRC point fingers at the employer or the agent, and to resolve them can't be done by the employer or the agent. They can only be done by HMRC. And so it's an element of bringing into play what's called a charge resolution case. In the old days, these used to be called dispute charge cases. Of course, employers are reluctant to have a dispute with HMRC, so they have kind of made the name a little bit friendlier. But you need to. The challenge with late reporting as well, and late items, is that can affect the apprenticeship levy liabilities as
Yeah.
well. So there's a whole plethora of other stuff, and also it can affect the what's called the EPS, or employer payment summary submission, as well. So there is an ability provided by HMRC, and probably by your payroll supplier maybe, or payroll software, for what they call a year-to-date FPS submissions. So errors can be corrected, things can be reported late, but there are potential penalty and interest charge implications. And also you've got to remember that may adjust the EPS that had been filed, because the year-to-date totals for you as an employer may now be different.
Very complex. Lots of
Mm.
lots of rules, very complex. You've got to make sure it's done by the books. Okay, so last question. So can UK employees roll up holiday pay?
Um, Rolled up holiday pay used to be fairly common, but we know from recent, well, from a ruling actually back in 2006, it was ruled unlawful. Uh, Yet some employers still carried on doing it. So the 1207% was fairly common term known, thinking, well, 1207% represents 5.6 weeks. Well, it might if they work every week, but if they don't, it doesn't. And then there was a famous case called the Brazil case, which was a term time worker, where they'd applied 1207%, and she'd been denied holiday pay for the periods of the summer when everybody was on summer holidays, and won. Um, However, the government, I think, recognised that there were some difficulties with the prior 5.6 weeks, 52 weeks averaging. So they introduced new rolled up holiday pay. In fact, the first rolled up holiday pay, because all rolled up holiday pay before was unlawful. They brought in the new rolled up holiday pay for holiday years starting 1st of April 2024, but only for irregular and part-year workers. And a part-year worker is someone who is under employment contract but has weeks where they're not paid. So it would work for a seasonal worker if they were retained, I guess. But if it was just you're employed for 3 months, that's not a part-year worker, unless they've got some weeks of not paid but still under contract. And so it does allow you to apply a 1207%. The other thing about the rolled up holiday pays before is quite often they were only based on contract, even some of the accrual systems. So if you worked 15 hours a week, you got holiday based on 15 hours or 15 hours of pay. But if you did an extra 15 hours overtime or 20 hours overtime, you didn't get any holiday pay associated with it. The new rolled up holiday pay is 1207% as a minimum on all pay received by that employee in that pay period, and it's paid each pay period. So it is an option for those that are regular workers.
Mhm.
In other words, they don't really have any fixed days or pattern, 0 hours contract workers typically. And part years, you can have that operated for part year workers, typically term time workers who are still under contract but not paid for the summer.
Oh, well, look, thank you, Simon, and thank you so much for the walkthrough of the UK payroll. The landscape here is definitely very complex, ever evolving, and especially for international companies. So to our global audience, thank you for joining us for the UK session of Global Payfest 25, the first of hopefully very many. So we hope you found today's session very valuable, and that it's given you practical tools and insight to better managed payroll compliance in the UK. As I mentioned, for regular updates, you can sign up to monthly updates with Simon and SD Worx in the monthly webinar, Payroll Question Time, which is hosted by JGA. And of course, remember that all of today's sessions will be available on demand, so you can revisit the content, share it with your teams for plenty of upskilling. And up next, we are heading to the Netherlands, where we'll explore even more regional nuisances and best practices with Hein from Payroll Minds. So Simon, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, just wishing the global payroll world fantastic time, all the best. Things are rapidly changing here in the UK with major changes to UK employment rights. The big one, we've got statutory sick pay changes coming into play also sometime in 2026. Just think about it, the removal of the 4-day PIW. There is much to prepare for the future, so it's always keep that sort of audit of what's changing in each of the nations you look forward to. And good luck with payrolling benefits in kind for April 2026, as that will be a major change, especially for our international employers who will think, what on earth is going on?
Going to come around quickly, April 26th, that is
Well,
for sure. So yeah, thank you again, Simon. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And I'm sure our viewers feel very much the same and more confident in navigating UK payroll after this session. And that's all from us from the UK, and we will see you in the Netherlands.